America's center of power changed, and with it, the dynamics of the political landscape. The consequences will reverberate locally, in Florida, on Capitol Hill, and on the global stage. Voters demanded change on the issues that mattered most: the economy, immigration, and social issues. Now, News 4 Jax goes beyond the headlines with political analysts who provide unique context and perspective. Experts focused on the issues making headlines. This is Politics and Power.
Government efficiency. It was the premise behind President Trump's DOGE initiative. On the first day in office during his second term, he established the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. In the days since, 148,937 government jobs were eliminated. Many of the cuts were sudden and done to critical programs. There are those who argue they were done with little regard to the well-being of the people of this country. Welcome to Politics and Power. I'm Bruce Hamilton. Joining me on the show is Max Stier, an attorney and president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service. Thanks for joining us, Max.
Thanks for having me, Bruce.
It is good to talk with you again. So I want to start with this. You have a nonpartisan agenda here, and I want to get to that straight right off the bat.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you are. It's quite a remarkable world we're in right now. The partnership has been around for 24 years, and we have worked with Republican and Democratic administrations. Our goal is very straightforward, which is how do you make our government work better? Big or small belongs in the political debate, but whatever the people decide they want, we should have a government that can deliver on that effectively. Unfortunately, with this administration, the norms of the last 140 years have been turned upside down, and the goal of a government that is there for the public good rather than the private interests of the leaders of the day, that proposition has been thrown overboard. The last time we saw a president approach governing in the way that this administration is doing was during the 19th century in the spoils system. So very, very important that you raise this. It's not a partisan question. I have on my desk a book from a Republican OPM director that is the history of the civil service. And she was very proud to say that it was a expert, nonpartisan organization. Now we have a president who says that that's not what we need. We need loyalists. Not just amongst the political appointees, but amongst the career folks, and a president that has fired and gotten rid of anyone who sees their oath to the Constitution as more important than the rules of the president. So that's not partisan. I think people should understand that. They should understand that their welfare is now at stake if our government can't deliver on the promises that it makes, and it won't be able to do so with a loyalist set of civil servants and loyalism over capability and character, then we're in trouble.
And I wanted to make your position clear because people seem to think that everybody's got a political agenda. So the program and mission established by Donald Trump and Elon Musk to make bureaucracy more efficient, did it backfire?
100%. Great idea. We absolutely should demand and look for more from our government. How could it be any other way? Every organization needs to continue to modernize. We do have a legacy government that has not kept up with the world around it. The challenge, though, is that it's really been poor leaders that have put us in this hole. It's not the civil servants themselves. And we need great leadership in order to bring us to the modern age in terms of what our government can deliver. And that's not what we're getting right now. Instead, we're getting leaders that are taking us backwards, not forward.
Was it all maybe just a big illusion from the get-go?
It certainly was an illusion, and it certainly was an illusion from the get-go. The reality is that one of the very first things that President Trump did was to fire the independent inspector generals. Those are the people that are actually directed to find and address waste, fraud, and abuse. There are hundreds of billions of dollars that they have managed to save Americans. Getting rid of them was the single most harmful, first thing that he could do. And as I noted earlier, he's proceeded by upending the civil service so that those that are actually expert and are nonpartisan are being pushed out. And he is, appointing people to surround him that are there because they are loyal to him rather than because they have the capability or the character to run the large agencies that he's put them in charge of. Many of those leaders have, four or sometimes more agencies that they're running, again, because they're loyalists, not because they're the right person to do it. So we have a statement that is true, which is our government can do better, and a set of actions which are really taking us in the worst possible direction to achieve what is a laudable goal.
So the president wears a hat these days that says Trump was right about everything. There are those who believe that. Some of the programs the president, DOGE, and Congress wanted to dismantle were designed to protect consumers from fraud, eliminate waste in government, and protect taxpayer resources. Did the cutbacks and eliminating those safeguards in many ways have the opposite effect?
100%, no question about it. Look, no one is right all the time. When you're running the United States government, it's so vital that you get good information, good evidence, good data, so that you can make good decisions. And again, there's so many decisions that as president you're not making that others are, so they need that expert data and information. We're not seeing that, and instead we're seeing a governance model that is based on gut rather than the better choices of information and evidence. And you're also seeing a executive branch that is rolling over the way our Constitution was constructed. You mentioned agencies that have been swept off the face of the earth, and the reality is that is not a power that actually belongs to the executive. It's a power that Congress has, and that's true with respect to appropriations as well. So it's not just what that is being done, it's how it's being done. We're seeing our constitutional order blown up at incredible speed. It's so hard to keep track of because so many things are taking place. And the reality for all of us is that we're going to see a world, and we are already seeing a world that is more dangerous, that there's more risk in, and that we're receiving less rather than more from our government.
It worries me that people are blind to reality and they'll go, well, give me specifics, give me facts, and we can do it. And I know that I do it repeatedly on this program and in the context of the news, and they still don't want to face the reality. So let's talk about some specifics. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, DOGE, shuttered it. The agency returned some $26 billion, returned $26 billion to the American people since 2011. It cost a fraction to run. 1,480 employees were cut. What's the long-term impact going to be?
Well, so, all your facts are right, and I do hope that they will be persuasive to some. It's equally important to recognize not just what they did, but the way they did it. There was, fighting over the question of the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It came out of the financial crisis that we had earlier in this century. And the reality of it is that it wasn't up to President Trump or DOGE to shut it down. It really was something that if it was going to be changed, Congress needed to do it. That is vital because what we're talking about is the nature of our government, the democracy that we operate in, the constitutional system that is being blown up. So you're correct. The long-term consequences are going to be severe for our democracy. And people sometimes roll their eyes when you say that, but it's true. We want to live in a society in which the choices are made according to the rules. The rule of law applies. And if we don't have that, we will lose, all the things that we really care about. And that includes, our physical safety, the idea that we live in a country that has the most vibrant, powerful economic engine. The list goes on and on. So there are harms that, consumers will face because the CFPB won't be on the job. But even more fundamentally, Americans should care about, their way of life and the democracy that has led us to, such a privileged position in the world, because the way they are doing this runs smack into the constitutional order.
And look, our health is being put at stake here, too, because there are funding cuts to medical research. The administration slashed $4 billion in funding cuts to the National Institutes of Health, cut some 20,000 positions at the Department of Health and Human Services. This is money that was going to universities, hospitals, research institutes tackling diseases, including cancer, diabetes, cardiac conditions, things like heart failure. The nation's health is being put at risk.
Look, I think it's across the board, and I think you have, again, the what and the how both pointing in the same direction, which is that we're going the wrong way. And you're right. And it comes back, I think, ultimately to the people issue more than anything else. Our numbers were, we run a site that people can see at, ourpublicservice.org, our general website, that is a harms tracker to look at what exactly is being done to our government. The last numbers were the ones you just cited, about 150,000. Now that's up to 200,000. The administration says it's going to be 300,000. There very well may be federal employees that are not necessary. But again, the way they are doing it is clearly counterproductive and wrong. They are firing the people, ultimately that often are the most talented. They're firing the people that, are willing to speak up and speak truth to power. You look as an example at the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency that was fired because, his employees put out intelligence reports that said that the, bombing in Iran actually did not lead to the damage that the president claimed. You've got the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics being sacked because the employment numbers were bad. We don't wind up with a better society if you kill the messenger and if you're not actually respecting the truth. And again, there's people can have different opinions, they can't have different facts, but you have an administration that is fundamentally stating that opinion is fact and showing a disinterest and a hostility to any facts that might challenge the pre-existing opinions. And I think that's true for the administration, and I would ask Americans to think about it for themselves as well. These choices matter. These choices have huge impact on every American, and we should want to make sure that the information is there to make the best choices. People can want different things, but you need to understand the landscape to make sure that you're most likely to get what it is that you want. And that is not happening now.
So look, before I get back to the whole situation with medical research, let me go to what you just talked about, the labor statistics and the person that was fired. So what happens?
Yes.
The president goes ahead and he finds somebody that finds numbers that are to his liking, which, by the way, can't be vetted. And the American public goes, oh, look, the president found some numbers that contradict, what was said. And there are people that buy into that. So all of a sudden, what does the American public believe? What the president says or what are vetted true statistics? And, it creates this conundrum.
Look, I think that the issue of truth is meaningful here. Again, Senator Moynihan said, you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. I would hope that all Americans would agree to that basic proposition. And then the question becomes, how do you make sure that we are dealing with an accepted set of truths or facts? You noted at the very front end that this president goes around with a hat saying, I'm always right. That can't be. And if you start with that proposition, and if you start with a belief that anything that you learn or hear or see that is, contradicts what you previously believe and that you assure everyone is absolutely right, you don't wind up in a good place. That's okay for a private citizen. It's not okay for the President of the United States. It's not okay for leaders of federal agencies. It's not okay for civil servants. They all should be held to a higher standard. And that's not occurring right now. So, yes, I think that, there are a lot of Americans that are already suffering from the really poor management of our government. You raised the DOGE effort. Again, such an important idea being done in a way that's actually creating a lot more waste than it is certainly solving for. And these are all things that are going to, chickens are coming home to roost already.
Back to the nation's health care. It's not a partisan issue because you've got both Republicans and Democrats who've said, look, the way you're cutting the research funding is just not right. For instance, Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine, she called the cuts poorly conceived and said in no uncertain terms, there is no investment that pays greater dividends to American families than our investment in biomedical research. On the Democratic side of the aisle, Senator Patty Murray warned that the funding cuts would be nothing short of catastrophic for so much of the life-saving research patients and families are counting on. You've got an economic cost, jobs that have gone begging, and the health costs we've addressed. Is there any way to rebound and offset those costs, both physical and economic?
Look, I think fundamentally everything you say is, in my view, correct. And it's important to focus on the political process. You just highlighted the senior most people on the Congressional Appropriations Committee. And we do have a system in which Congress controls the purse. That's how our founders set it up. And the issues you raise are important, and they're actually overwhelmed by an even bigger one, which is you have a president who has been making cuts unilaterally, despite the fact that he is not entitled to do so. The Constitution does not let him do it. So there are, appropriate debates on the amount of money that should go to medical research and, what kind of research, et cetera. There should be zero debate that it should be done according to the constitutional order. And that means that Congress ultimately is in charge in setting up where it is that the money goes. And the president's job is the executive. They're supposed to execute. They're supposed to get it done. They're not supposed to, decide on the fundamental appropriations or the existence of the agencies themselves. Those are issues that seem, maybe, fuzzy or too big, but they are the heart of our democracy. And if we do not see those respected, our democracy goes away. So I agree with you that the choices themselves are deeply problematic, and the approach itself is more fundamentally flawed and should be worrisome for everybody.
I've asked this of other people. Are we in the middle of a constitutional crisis? And other people have said, you know what, we're not until he just violates an order from the Supreme Court. Is that just semantics?
I don't think it's just semantics. I do think that we're in a constitutional crisis because you have a president that fundamentally is operating as if it's an imperial presidency and is a maximalist, is using every potential authority that he has with zero restraint and waiting for, someone to say no, that can actually do something about it. And I think the bar keeps getting lowered and lowered. So I do think it would be, an even worse situation if this president, violated a direct, Supreme Court order. But this president shouldn't even be making decisions that are so clearly outside the lines. The job of the president isn't to do everything that they think they can do until they're told they can't do it. They're supposed to use, their own appropriate judgment and restraint to make sure that the authority is being used in a careful and considered fashion. That is not what is occurring today. And so, the courts are playing catch up right now. Some of them are stopping some of the behaviors. I think the Supreme Court has more work to do on that. But it's a little bit like, Donald Trump is behaving as a real estate developer who has this very pretty piece of land with an old growth, set of trees on it. And he just cuts them down and waits for someone to sue him and says, sue me and win your case if you can over time. The reality of this is that you can't, put the trees back up. Once they're cut down, they're done. So a president of the United States, when they're dealing with the powers of the government, should not be doing that. And that is what we're seeing today.
So we talked a bit about our physical health and how that's being compromised. I worry about the health of our kids because there have been major cuts to the Department of Education with overtures to close the department and pass things on to individual states, which, by the way, the states can't afford. Is this going to come at the expense of our kids' education?
Look, again, there's the what and the how once more here. I mean, I was reading a wonderful piece this morning from USA Facts, which lays out, where resources for public education comes from. I believe Mississippi gets the largest percentage of its support for educating its kids from the federal government. So I think, when, states look at the facts and leaders in states look at the facts and Americans look at the facts, they will see that the federal role in education is quite important and important in areas that, otherwise might not be as appreciative of it. So I do think that there is significant harm here. But again, there is a political process. If the president wants to get rid of the Department of Education, wants to change the way it operates, he needs to go to Congress and he needs to get it changed in through the democratic process, through our constitutional order, through Congress. That is not what is happening right now. They're firing all the people that are needed to get the work done. They're not paying the money that the Congress has appropriated for education and other things. That how piece is even more fundamental. And I keep coming back to the same thing because it is so important.
When you look at these specifics, and I'm going to keep using that word because there are specifics here that people are blind to. Everything that's going on is tied to Project 2025, which Donald Trump doesn't know anything about, of course. It's expected the cuts will have a dramatic impact on low-income schools. Costs those schools some 180,000 teachers. Don't federal subsidies and spending for job training and education increase lifetime earnings and boost long-term economic productivity, making all of this counterproductive?
There's no question. Look, I think that the research is clear that a lot of these investments pay off. And it's also clear that there are better ways to do things. So the status quo is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But the way to get to better is not to blow it all up. And it's certainly not to blow up the system and to do it in a way that's contrary to our Constitution either. So yes, I think there are all kinds of ways in which what we're seeing is a administration that claims that they're dealing with waste when they're the greatest waste creator that we've ever seen. Ultimately, I don't think any Americans benefit from this. I think the only people who are benefiting are our enemies, and that is not what you want to see, out of the leadership from our government. So we can and should be doing better. Ultimately, it's going to be the American people that need to understand what is going on, understand that there's a better way to achieve a modern government, and holds the current leadership to account. And that's what we need to see happen. And it will require people to pay attention and to have, media and others share important information.
If I've learned anything in life, one of the biggest predictors of the future is to look to the past. Donald Trump also won student loans handled by the Small Business Administration. We saw how it handled things during the pandemic. It was overwhelmed. Can it handle the bureaucratic challenges that it entails when it comes to student loans?
Look, there's again appropriate questions that can be asked about, what's the better way to implement programs like the student loan program. I agree fundamentally. The SBA, Small Business Administration, is just not set up to manage the federal student aid and the student loan portfolio. It's worse than reorganizing the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's going to make things substantially worse. I do think that there is a tendency in this administration, and certainly with DOGE, it was fire, fire, fire rather than ready, aim, fire. There is good, sort of thinking that could be done about, are there better ways to put the different pieces of our government together? I think that technology opportunities with AI, for example, will allow us to reimagine a lot of how we produce things. But the way this is being done is scattered, non-strategic, and damaging. So yes, the Small Business Administration today is not ready to take on the federal student aid portfolio, and whatever complaints and appropriate complaints people might have about how the Department of Education has done with that portfolio so far will be so small against the challenges that we're likely to see if the SBA takes it on today, because it's not ready. And the appropriate investments and thinking that is necessary to make something like that work have not been done. And there's been no case really made that it's the right choice, even over the long term. So, these are really, really important questions that have large consequences for many Americans and ultimately also for the American taxpayer that's footing the bill on all this. And as I said earlier, this is just an approach that creates huge waste, and we don't need it. We have so many demands. We have such a large deficit. We need to be doing things better, not worse, and certainly not substantially worse, which is the course that we're on right now.
I found it kind of interesting, and I think it was either yesterday or today that Elon Musk said something about a government that turns its back on the needs of the people is a government that's, going to have trouble. There's a juxtaposition.
Look, I think, Elon Musk is a unbelievable genius who has rethought and been able to change, core parts of our economy with SpaceX and with Tesla, and he did the worst job imaginable on such a fundamental question, which is how to help our government run better. And so the most important thing one would hope is that there's some real learning that comes out of it. There's a Silicon Valley mantra, which is fail fast. And the idea is not to fail. The idea is to fail fast so that you can learn, so that you can succeed, more quickly the next time out. So the most important thing is for him to have learned. And if he's learned, that's good. He left a lot of damage in his wake in the meanwhile. But it is true that, we do need the best and brightest from the tech world. They have to understand the context in which they're operating in. And they have to respect and appreciate the expertise that exists there already in the federal government. And that's the only way. Like any decent manager knows that you engage, you don't alienate your workforce. That doesn't mean you don't change things, but it means that you make sure you understand them first, and you make sure you get the best ideas and the best capability out of the workers that are there. These are like just fundamentals, and they were violated in the most profound way. And what's worse about it is you're talking about public servants, people who have really committed their professional lives to serve the American public, and they were treated in the worst possible way, and that's just wrong.
Max, what did our parents tell us when we were young? You haven't failed if you learn from your mistakes, right?
Yes. Well, and here though, I would say that like the mistakes have very large consequences. When I was young,
I understand. I was oversimplifying, but yeah.
No, but you're right. But the learning piece is so fundamental. And this is an administration that doesn't learn. And how could it learn if they don't recognize that anything that they do could have been better? And as you started this whole thing off with the president wearing a hat saying, I'm always right, you can't learn if you believe that you're always right. So it does violate the most basic propositions that I believe most parents hope their children learn. And one would hope that when you're talking about the president of the United States, that's the place where you need the most, thoughtful, wise approach to the world. It's a scary place that we live in, and we need leadership that understands that has humility in order to be able to learn from what is happening and get better. Because the stakes are just too high otherwise.
And I will add this caveat: when we were young children and stopping short of failure, but learning from our mistakes, we weren't self-serving. So I'll leave people to read into that what they want. When politics and power continues, the impact of DOGE cuts on the food supply, hurting farmers, raising prices, and endangering public health in the food arena, and its impact on international development, and how much incoming revenue may be lost because of cuts at the IRS. That and more when Politics and Power continues. Welcome back to Politics and Power. Bruce Hamilton, my guest, Max Stier, an attorney and president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service. Max, the impact of DOGE and the Department of Agriculture. They deal with food safety, food assistance, help farmers. Did DOGE cause chaos at the USDA when it fired and attempted to rehire workers who were researching and combating the bird flu, which posed some very real risks?
Yes, is the answer. DOGE, again, approached this as fire, 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 not ready, aim, fire. So you saw this at the Department of Agriculture with, bird flu experts. You saw it, at the IRS. You've seen it at the, with air traffic controllers. So many places in which they fired people only eventually to realize that it was dumb as dirt. And then there was, insane risk that was being created, and they tried to rehire the folks that they had fired. And it just is a very concrete example of poor planning, poor understanding of consequence, and that's still happening today. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. There's not that learning that we talked about taking place that really ought to be happening. So specifically with the Department of Agriculture, USDA is an amazing place. It does a lot of things that a lot of Americans don't realize, and you noted that one of the things that they do is try to help ensure that things like avian flu and other diseases that can be spread through animals and then sometimes get passed on to human beings are addressed before they become big problems. But the Department of Agriculture is vital to rural areas in terms of education, in terms of small businesses. It has a very, very important footprint in our country, and it has lost incredible talent. People are being moved out of D.C. as an effort to so-called get people closer to the people they're serving, even though what that is doing is actually chasing away more talent than it's helping. 90% of Department of Agriculture employees already work outside of the D.C. metro area. There's a lot of mismanagement that's taking place, and DOGE has been a front-end big part of it, but frankly, it's extending even beyond that. And it's, big and small. You've got these giant banners that were put out in front of the Department of Agriculture in Washington of Donald Trump next to Abraham Lincoln. And you got to ask yourself, why is taxpayer money being spent producing giant banners of the president? It's unnecessary. It is, self-promotion, and it is waste.
Yeah, they provide food to food insecure families, support for farmers.
Yep.
USDA cut or paused some $1 billion in funding for local schools and food banks. Local food banks, do they have the wherewithal to pick up the slack?
I mean, no is the answer. There's already a gap that is very large, and the federal government's supply of resources is the most important, and it has retreated. It's retreated with no notice. Like, you can imagine a world in which different priorities were set. You allowed food banks and others to prepare for what was the change that they wanted to take place. None of that was done. There was just like a no interest in consequence, no interest in making cuts less harmful. And on the personnel side, you have an OMB director who said that he wanted to traumatize the federal workforce. I don't want to traumatize anybody, and certainly not public servants. But that is what they did and what they continue to do.
We've heard a lot about USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. Nearly all of the agency's 10,000 employees were fired, placed on indefinite leave, or otherwise removed. President Trump and his allies claim the U.S. has needlessly sent money abroad with no return for the American people. Is that true, or is there a return on that investment for America?
Look, I think there is and it's been a longstanding, argument about what soft power should look like, what kind of assistance we should be providing to people in need. As I said earlier, there's the what and there's the how. That debate is an appropriate debate to be done through the political process. Ultimately, what is not appropriate is for it to be decided unilaterally by the executive branch. And that is what occurred here. Congress appropriated those dollars. Congress said they wanted it spent. Our constitutional system requires the executive to spend the money that Congress appropriates. It should make sure that it spends it well. But that's not what was going on here. They simply didn't want it spent. And they didn't want to have the employees that were needed to actually get it spent in the right way. So this is, really an area that I think Americans, should understand that whatever they think about foreign aid, that is not the most important issue. The most important issue is, do we have a king, or are we a constitutional democracy? And we have a president that is acting like the king. And that is not what the framers wanted. In fact, they designed a system to prevent that. But we have an administration, and in particular a president, that is, again, upending all of those rules and norms and seizing power that he should not have, and that our system does not actually give to him.
Talk about the IRS. 11,000 Internal Revenue Service employees got caught in the DOGE cuts. An estimated $500 billion in revenue will be lost this year alone due to the cuts at the IRS. Will these cuts undermine the ability of the IRS to fairly and equally enforce the nation's tax laws?
So this is, I think, a great example. IRS is obviously not a beloved government institution. But in fact, while Americans may not love it, they should want an IRS that works well. And the reason why they should want an IRS works well is that the IRS doesn't set the tax rates or the tax policy. Again, that's something that Congress does through laws. What the IRS is doing is making sure that tax dollars are collected fairly, meaning that everyone who owes the money pays the money, and that certain Americans aren't carrying the weight for everybody else because other people are cheating. They also try to make sure that Americans get the customer service so that they know what they should be doing as best as possible, and to prevent scamming. Now, can the IRS do better? It surely can. But the reality of the situation for all of us now is we have an IRS that is being dismantled. What that will mean is that our deficit will go up, as you just noted, fewer tax dollars from people who owe the money. This is not increased taxes. It's simply people doing their share that the law requires. Those people will get away with not doing it because you don't have the personnel at the IRS that are necessary. You'll have more scammers who can take advantage of the elderly and everybody else because you won't have the IRS folks who can try to stop them and educate the public. And you won't have the IRS answering questions that people need answered to make sure that they're paying what they owe and not more than what they owe, and that they get their refunds in a timely way. So, this is worse than cutting off your nose to spite your face. This is an organization that needs effective management. It needs the right people. It has been stripped bare of resources for a while now. That was turning around, and this administration, is doing worse than it's ever been before to the IRS. And yeah, we'll pay. We'll wind up paying because there'll be a lot of people who owe money, companies and wealthy individuals and wealthy partnerships that are going to get away scot-free, which is going to put more burden on all the rest of us.
Max, let's come full circle here. Get to the bottom line, back to where we started. Department of Government Efficiency. Are the actions we have seen ill-conceived and chaotic?
That's an easy one. There's no doubt about that. And it's extraordinary. Like, again, the last reports I saw was that the money that they claimed to have saved was something on the order of 5% of what they actually claimed was actually verifiable and right. They got, mistakes that they made. They claimed billions when it was millions. The laundry list is huge. So 5% of what they claimed, when in fact, even that money wasn't really savings. It was cuts. There's a difference between cuts and savings. If my son decided not to fill his gas tank and therefore, of his car and say, wow, I just saved myself 30, 40, whatever dollars because I didn't put gas in my car. And then they can't drive the car and can't go anywhere. Did he save money? No, he didn't save money. He reduced his expenses at a larger cost of his ability to get everything else done. And that's what we're witnessing with the DOGE cuts. They weren't actual savings. They were cuts that actually had more wasteful consequence on the back end than the money that they allegedly saved. So they made huge errors. They fired a ton of great people, and we're going to be paying the price for a very long time. How long will depend on whether this administration learns. So that point about learning is so fundamental. We're not seeing it right now. And ultimately, it's going to require the American people to hold them to account because that is the only way they will learn.
It seems the better name would be the Department of Government Inefficiency. The American people need to open their eyes. They need to wake up. The American people need to do something. The question is what, when, and how long is it going to take to rebound because the cost is going to be great.
No argument here. I think that's exactly right. It is important to focus on the fact that we can and should do better. This is not a defense of the status quo. This is a recognition that the way DOGE and this administration has proceeded is actually putting us in a deeper hole, not getting us out of it. And ultimately, yes, we're going to need the American public to first understand and recognize what's going on, see that there is a better path, and ultimately hold these folks to account. That's the way our system is supposed to work. The challenge here is that the system protections themselves are being attacked. And that's when the American people need to speak up even louder.
Max Stier, hopefully some eyes have been opened. I appreciate your context, your perspective, and your focus. And to those of you who have been watching, thank you. We appreciate you for watching Politics and Power.
Thank you so much.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.